Today I'm going to talk to you about my research project on instructional practices in developmental math and from the student and teacher perspectives. The majority of students enrolling in developmental math the majority of students enrolling in developmental education are enrolling in developmental math. The National Center for Educational Statistics reports that 70% of the students in developmental education are in math. One study from Rehak and McKinney shows that the pass rates vary from 9.5% to 60%. And with the high enrollment and low pass rates, many institutions are looking to reform developmental education programs. And this study was designed to look at what is happening at the classroom level. This study had 6 research questions to guide the study. The first 2 are descriptive and are to provide information about the instructional practices occurring in the classroom according to students and teachers. Questions 4 and 5 are also descriptive and are to provide information about the perceived benefits of those instructional practices being used. And questions 3 and 6 are correlational. I want to know if there is a relationship between what the students report and what the teachers report. So this chart shows my overview of my literature review. This review provided the basis for which instructional practices were considered best, and it also helped to guide which instructional practices would be a part of the survey that I used. And these practices had research to show that they increase student performance in developmental math. So you can see there's organizational and study skills, technology use, communication, problem solving, cooperative learning, and frequent low-stake assessments. So in the second column is a brief definition of each of those practices, and the third column is the benefits provided from those, or benefits received from those practices, and the last column is the references for each of those practices. The participants in this study were chosen using a convenient sample. The developmental math teachers were from a local community college and were chosen based on the variety of courses available during the morning hours. The sample was collected during 1 week in this spring semester. There were 5 teachers and 89 students involved that participated in the survey. One of the teachers actually allowed me to survey all 3 of his classes, so that was helpful. To collect the data to answer the research questions, a self-designed survey was created. The survey had 3 parts. 2 parts were used for this study. The first part asked students and teachers to rate the frequency of use of certain instructional practices. Those were the instructional practices that came from the literature review. This part consisted of 10 questions, each question with 5 ratings. And the ratings were never, seldom, sometimes, often, and very often. And the survey provided an explanation of those ratings. The second part asked students and teachers to rate the perceived benefits of those practices. And this part consisted of 9 questions with 5 ratings of very helpful, mostly helpful, slightly helpful, not at all helpful, or not applicable. The data collected allow for a mean frequency to be calculated for each of the instructional practices. It also allowed for a mean to be calculated for the perceived helpfulness for each instructional practice. By having both teachers and students complete the survey with corresponding questions, a Pearson's correlation was able to be used. The Pearson was also able to be used because the data met the assumptions required for the correlation. So for the results on the teachers, The top 3 instructional practices used based on the mean were returning graded assignments within 1 week, teaching problem-solving skills, and using a software program to assign the homework. And you can see that the mean for the graded assignments was 4.8, with the highest being a 5. The problem-solving skills, again, 4.6, and the highest being 5. And then software for homework, the mean was 4.4. The teachers reported the instructional practices that they perceived to be the most helpful. Their top 3, according to their mean, were problem-solving skills, feedback on assignments, meaning that whenever they graded any work, that they included why a student got it wrong, or that they had done a great job, or something along those lines. And then using software for homework. The results for the students, again, this was by mean. So the top 3 instructional practices that they participated in were getting their graded assignments returned quickly, problem-solving skills, and software for homework. And then for those top 3 that they rated as most helpful were problem-solving skills, note-taking skills, and feedback on assignments. This table shows the correlations. So you can see here that there were 3 statistically significant relationships. The first one was the instructor responses for the instructional practices used, and the instructor responses of the helpfulness of the instructional practice. The second one was the instructor responses of the instructional practice used, and the student responses of the instructional practices used. And the third one was student responses of instructional practices used, and instructor responses of helpfulness of the instructional practice. The correlations that were statistically significant were expected. Students and teachers should report the same practices as occurring in the classroom. Also, teachers should think that they are using practices that are helpful to students. However, the correlations that were not statistically significant may provide a little more insight to what is happening in the classroom. Students are not reporting the most helpful are not reporting the most frequently used instructional practices as being helpful. This indicates a mismatch of perceived benefits of some of these instructional practices. So one way the teachers can become aware is to communicate more frequently. One of the techniques that can be implemented is using classroom assessment techniques. For example, teachers can periodically include questions on quizzes or tests to ask about the instruction and how they're doing as a teacher. That's just one suggestion of many that can allow teachers to evaluate their own teaching. This also allows students to have some input on what is happening in their classroom. Thank you for listening.